You don't need a complicated rib recipe that's going to turn people's heads. And I'm going to prove that to you today. I'm going to give you an old school method that involves smoking ribs on a pellet cooker, but then also flame kissing them on a grill. Stay tuned and I'll give you tips along the way. Hey, I'm Silly Bubba. Thanks for tuning in. I'm a KCBS barbecue judge and soon to be founder of the Smokers Guild, where we help cooks like you feel more confident with their grills and their smokers and turn out head turning barbecue. Again, thanks for coming, and let's get right into this. All right, today is all about keeping it simple. Simple is the best way to do ribs, and let me tell you, and I'm going to walk you through one of the first rib recipes that I tried years ago. And guess what? It turned out great. Awesome flavor, competition style ribs, and you're going to love it. It's very straightforward, but I'm not going to stop there. After I cook them on the pellet cooker, I'll then flame kiss them and lock in that bark, that flavor. You're going to love this recipe, and I want you to try it this weekend and tell me how it turns out for you, okay? So let's get started with these ribs. I'm not going to go through the whole trimming process right now, but I want to show you just something that's my first tip for you. You see this thin edge right here? I absolutely encourage you to cut that off, because if you don't, what's going to happen? The heat will bombard these thin edges and they're going to dry up and give you less than spectacular ribs. So I'm going to take this off. Now, some of this is good meat, and if you want to, you can keep it for sausage. All right. Now, I already have a full video on ribs and how to trim them, so I'm not going to bore you with that, but just wanted to give you the first tip, and that's making sure that thin meat is removed. Here's my next tip in cooking ribs. Have you ever wondered about, do I have a clean hand, dirty hand? I don't want to contaminate my rub bottle. You know, those nitrile gloves that you see me wearing, and you probably have some too. Take one of those gloves, slide it right over your bottle. Keeps your bottle clean. Make sure you open it first so that you don't have to keep touching the top. But it keeps your rub clean. It keeps your area non-contaminated. Here's something to keep in mind when rubbing your ribs. A lot of people season this close to the rack of ribs. You do not want to do that. You want to come up about a foot is what I typically do, because you want even coverage. Now watch what I mean by that. You go right along the bones. You can give it a good amount of rub. And then you want to pat it in, just like that. All right? I'm not using a binder today because there's enough moisture on top of the ribs so that it's not an issue. So now I'm going to flip over to the meat side, and I'm going to do the same thing. And notice how high up I am. And you want good, even coverage. All right, it's already taking that mahogany hue. A lot of people wonder, how do I get all of that smoke flavor that I'd miss from my grill or my offset cooker? And I'm using a pellet cooker, and that's a big worry that a lot of people have. So what I do, I use my torch and a smoke tube. Simple as that. I light it on one end. It's full of my competition pellets. I get a flame, and I get smoke. Then it's simple as just blowing it out, and you get great smoke flavor on your ribs. So let's get these ribs on. These are thicker. I bunch them up a little bit, because how you do it is exactly how it's going to cook. Put those there, just like that. All right, let's let these cook. All right, so is it time to spritz the meat yet? Let's look and find out. Let's look at this rack right here. Perfect, the rub is not coming off. It's set, and that's what you want. You don't want to spritz before that. All right, so I tried to find my spritz bottle. I looked all over the place, couldn't find it. I think one of my kids took it and like chunked it in the neighbor's yard, but that's okay, because I have this. I have something cheap, something last minute. It's a Minute Maid bottle. But what I did is poked a few holes right in the top of that. Guess what? Cheap spritz bottle. Watch how this works. And I get good, even coverage. Just want the meat wet. Again, smoke adheres to wet surfaces. We're not trying to drown the ribs. We just want them to get to the point where they don't turn into beef jerky right on top. All right, so let's let them cook. These ribs are really starting to come together. Great color. Just going to spritz these a little bit more to make sure that the bark does not dry out. And again, you might be curious what I'm using in here. It's not actually Minute Maid that I have in here. I'm using a mixture of pineapple juice, grape juice, and apple juice. But all the recipes, in fact, the rub, the spritz, and even the glaze that I'm going to use at the end, you can find in the description. And by the way, I'm cooking at 275 degrees if you were curious about that. But if you feel like you want to run it a little lower than that at 250 or 225, just know that you'll have to adjust your timing. One thing to keep in mind as your ribs are cooking, you might notice every now and then little areas where maybe the rub wasn't quite applied perfectly. And you notice, of course, some of the fluids coming out, that fat is rendering. Some of the bone marrow is even coming out and so forth. I'm not going to really sweat that, but what I am going to do, and what you can do if you want an even coverage and even bark, again, I'm cooking at 275, just take your rub while it's on the pit, cover up some of these areas, reapply it. And then what you can do, you can actually help the process a little bit by taking your spritz bottle, in my trusty lemonade bottle here, just kind of wet it a little bit, and that's going to help that bark form and be beautiful and be uniform and delicious. These are coming around nicely, and pretty soon we're going to be at the wrap stage. So how do you know your ribs are ready to wrap? Well, that's important. They've been on about 3 hours at 275. There's a storm coming in. I'm trying not to get struck by lightning. So let's get to this. All right. Check out the ribs and how they're looking. I've spritzed them periodically, but look at that color. It's mahogany. But most important, look at the rub. It's staying on. It's not rubbing off. That's locked in place, and that's what you want, and that's when you know it's ready to be put in some foil. So we're going to show you the next step of the process, and you're going to love it. All right, so we're at the next stage of the process right now, and I'm going to wrap these ribs. But again, look at the color, and I want you to see it, because it's very important that your ribs reach this color, mahogany red. The bark is set, it's not rubbing off, because we do not want the rub to come off in the wrap. All right, so what I'm going to do, I have a sheet of foil here, and put these ribs in the foil. Now, I'm not doing the full competition wrap that you all have seen on YouTube and other videos before, where it's brown sugar, butter, honey, and barbecue sauce, and a few things like that. This is an old school recipe that I learned. And so what I'm going to do, in this little mason jar here, I have a half a cup of apple juice, quarter cup of grape juice, and a quarter cup of pineapple juice. All three of these juices go so well with pork. So I'm going to let the ribs braise in that. Now, we're not going to drown these ribs at all. Just going to a little bit in it just to keep it wet. And the nice thing about it, let's get a little bit more. Nice thing about it is that as these ribs sit in this liquid and braise, the juice will combine with the rendered fat in the ribs. And we're going to use that juice a little bit later, and that's part of this recipe. Make sure your ribs are nice and tight. We don't want to steam. Do not steam your ribs. We want to braise your ribs. So in order to do that, the foil has to be very tight. And as you can see right here on the bottom, it's super tight. We don't want any air in there. All right, so let's get these ribs on. All right, so let's get these ribs back on. And we're going to let them go probably for at least another hour, hour and a half to get them tender. I'm going to use my probe, my thermopin, to check in between the bones to see. I want it to get to about 203, 205 degrees, and that's when I know it's completely done, and then we'll move on to the next step. Well, since I last saw you, we had one heck of a storm blow through. We had a severe thunderstorm with hail, high winds, and everything else. And it almost kept me from getting out here to check on these ribs, but alas, we're here. So let's see how they're progressing. Okay, they're looking good. One quick way to tell if your ribs are getting close to being done, they should flex like that. See how loose that is? Another thing you can do, obviously, other than burn your fingertips off like I just did, which I have cotton gloves under these nitrile gloves, by the way. I come in here. Look at that. Do you see that bone pull back? That tells you right there that it's very likely close to being done. And if you like temperature checking, let's see what it looks like on the Thermapen. Look, 207, 208, about the same. And notice what I can do here on the bones too. Notice that. If I wanted to, I could pull that out. I could pull that out. Like you can twist the bones in the meat. That tells you that these ribs are done. Now I've already checked the other rack of ribs off camera. Those are also done. And now on to the next step. Now the next step in my rib process, and you might not ordinarily think about it, but I'm going to let these ribs rest. So think about it. They've been in 275-degree temperatures for about 2 to 3 hours. So everything's boiling. And what we want these ribs to come down to a normal temperature, a normal eating kind of temperature. And that's before our next step where we really amp up the flavor. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this rack, I'm going to put it in a cooler, and it's going to sit in that cooler probably for another 20 or 30 minutes, and then meet me back at the grill. So the ribs have now been resting for about 30 minutes, and now we're moving on to our next step. So again, I used several juices as part of the braising method, but we don't want to throw those juices out. I have a glaze right here that I've made that's pretty simple, and you can see it in the instructions down in the description. Basically, this is 2/3 part Sweet Baby Ray's. I make my own sauces, but today I'm giving you a really simple recipe that you could go to the grocery store and make. Now, I also added about 1/3 cup of honey to it. It's a very simple glaze. But if you've ever had a barbecue sauce before on meat and it doesn't quite marry well, the meat tastes good on its own, the sauce tastes good on its own, but together they kind of clash and compete. Well, there's a way to get around that. Again, our ribs have been resting, and they're resting in all that juice. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take some of that juice, if I can do it without killing myself here, and I am going to pour about 2 to 3 tablespoons of that juice right into the ribs. And that will marry the flavor together. All of that rendered fat, that pork flavor now is in with that glaze. So this is a sauce that you wouldn't keep for days on end. This is a sauce that's going to taste really good on meat tonight. It's going to work perfectly on these ribs. So let's go on to our next step. So now you've reached the final step of this cooking process. And if you've ever had ribs before at like a state fair, you know they're just totally next level, right? They're smoked, they're juicy, they're just great. But the process that they go through at the end is they do what's called flame kissing. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to do flame kissing a la hot glazing. So let's see how that works. I've got my kettle going here, just got some regular lump charcoal heated up. You could grill on this, you could grill a steak at this. So this is really hot, but this is what I'm going to do. So my ribs, now they've been resting for about 30 minutes. You can tell they're tender. They're pretty much all cooked at this point. So let's get them hot glazed. Show you how that happens. We're going to put them on like that. And we're going to just apply heavy glaze to the backside of these ribs. It's almost like a steak. As often as you would flip a steak, that's what you're going to do to these ribs because we don't want them to burn. All right, so we got a good layer of glaze on. And again, that's just Sweet Baby Ray's honey and some of the fat renderings from inside of the foil. So we're going to flip these over. See, you're getting a little bit of char marks. You see that sizzle on there. And that's great. That's what you want to see. You're going to get that flame kiss, that authentic barbecue flavor. And put the glaze on there. Nobody's afraid of any char marks. Those char marks are delicious flavor. And this is how you can take a pellet rib and amp up the flavor so that it's championship or competition worthy. And what you're going to do, you're just going to keep applying layers and layers of sauce. You're going to let them cook like this for probably 20 or 30 seconds. and then flip again. And look at this sizzle as I flip. Look at that. Not burned, but we got some sizzle action going. So let's put another layer of sauce. Of course, sauce has sugar, so you're going to have to watch your time, probably 20 or 30 seconds. Gonna get a little bit of char on there. I'll flip it probably a couple more times at this point. I've got these nitro gloves on that are full of sauce, but they've also got cotton liners under there. I don't think I'm He-Man under here or the Hulk, just flipping ribs and burning my fingers off. I'm not trying to do that. It's a little hot, but better than nothing. All right, here we go again. Oh, nice char. Look at that sizzle, though. Ribs sizzling. Get some glaze on that. Okay. Getting that glaze locked in. You've got the best of both worlds now. You've got a smoky rib and you've got a fair rib because these things are going to be just perfect. They're flame kissed. So I'm a little greedy. Let's go one more time. Get the backside. Reglaze them. There again, you're going to want to have a lot of glaze, right? Okay. And we want that top side, that meat side, the presentation side to look pretty. So we don't want to let that sit too long. And one final time. That's it. Look at that. Okay. So let's get these ribs off and start to cutting. So thank you for hanging with me on this really long cook, but it is so worth it. You know, a lot of folks have pellet cookers and they want to do ribs. So this is one way to do it. But we turned up the volume a little bit with that flame kiss right at the end. So let's see what we got. And if you can see these ribs, it's exactly what we want. Look at that mahogany color. It's like a show car, right? But let's see how they taste. Flip these over. And we're going to cut a rib out just to see what we're dealing with. First of all, look at that color. Look at the smoke ring. And people say you can't get smoke on a pellet smoker. I think we did. Yeah. And it's flame kissed. So you've got that taste that you would get from a state fair, as well as an awesome competition style smoked rib. So let's give it a taste. That's awesome. That's so awesome. You got to try it this weekend. Now, a lot of you are probably going to have friends and family over your house this weekend. I gave you a recipe that's going to work. Check the description. I'll give you the rub recipe. I'll give you the glaze. And also, you've already got the foil wrap ingredients. Put this to the test. Grub down this weekend and enjoy yourself. Please continue to follow and subscribe as I'll have more content coming your way.